you. My name is Scott Hamwey with MassDOT. It's great to be here. And I'm here today to talk about a project that I'm very excited about, which is the MBTA's long-range 25-year capital plan. Alice Brown and Go Boston 2030 had already taken all the good names, so I had to ask my 11-year-old for an idea of what we could call this process. And she came up with Focus 40, which is meant to signify a focus for the MBTA and also a focus on 2040, which is our horizon year. And as a planner, I really like looking out into the future. I think that's a great and valuable thing to do. But as Stacy kind of hinted at, it's been a challenging year for us to think too far in the future. One of those reasons was we had a series of four major snowstorms that hit over a 3-week period. That was a challenge. And then this summer we released an updated estimate for what the economic scale is of our state of good repair backlog, the money we need to spend just to get our system to function the way it's intended to. So it's difficult to think about the future when you have that as the context, but we know that we simply can't afford not to think about the future when it comes to the MBTA, and that's because despite all of its shortcomings, demand for MBTA services continues to grow, and that's a great thing. And I think, if anything, the snows reminded us what a critical and central role the T plays in the region's economy, and it's a very dynamic and ever-evolving economy, and the T needs to continue to think about ways that we can plan ahead for that future. Another challenge that you have when you're planning long-term is that the context within which you're planning, all those things out of your control, it's hard to really see where those are going to go over a 25-year period. I'm sure the city's, run into the same problem. And I'd like to just share a story that my boss, Secretary Stephanie Pollack, has been sharing recently. And she talks about the challenges transportation planners would have had 100 years ago doing an exercise like this, doing a 25-year plan. And back in 1915, the focus would have been on, or the big question would have been, should we be spending more money to pave roads to make it easier for bicycling, which was an emerging form of transport at the time, or popular form, or should we keep roads unpaved, which is better for horses, which was still the dominant form of transport at the time. Of course, by the end of a 25-year planning horizon, those modes would have been rendered irrelevant by the automobile. So, we know we can't predict with any certainty what the future is going to look like, but given all of the things that are changing in the world today, whether it's our climate, whether it's demographic shifts, whether it's new technology and new mobility options, some of which we've heard of tonight, we know we need to consider these because some of these trends may really change the role that the T is going to need to play when we look out to 2040. And I'll just spend a couple minutes talking about some of those trends that we're planning to engage with folks on. I'll start with sea level rise and flooding, an element of climate change. If you look out to 2040, we have a lot of areas, the Seaport District, the area around Aquarium Station, East Boston where I live, where there's going to be some MBTA assets that are severely threatened by sea level rise, and that raises a very challenging question for the T, whether or not we need to start thinking about investing a significantly greater amount of resources in shoring up and preserving those assets, or whether we might need to make the difficult decision about thinking about different ways in which we can serve some of those markets and some of those origin destination pairs. I talked about how demand for the T is still growing, and part of that is because for the first time since World War II, we're seeing urban population growth outpace the growth in the suburban area and in the state. And we think that's a really good thing, but it does create burdens on the T to try to deliver service that can meet that growth and demand. It also creates burdens on some of our most dependable customers. We're all familiar with how housing costs and rents are skyrocketing in the region, particularly in areas near quality transit. And there's a real danger that a lot of the low-income customers we have that depend on the service are going to be forced into further away from good transit. Also, after a half century of rampant suburbanization, we know that there's going to be a significant amount of aging in place that's happening in relatively lower, denser suburban environments where it can be harder to serve with transit. So, it's this interesting challenge because the T is one of these unique systems nationally where we serve a very dense urban population center, which is where transit works best. But that's also been an area where there's been a disproportionate share of the sort of transit-dependent population. So if in 2040 we've had significant number of those transit-dependent folks living on the periphery of the system where it's more expensive and transit is sometimes less effective, that raises a real question about what the MBTA's roles and responsibilities are. Another trend that's been driven a lot by the millennial generation is just this decrease in reliance on the automobile, whether it's people being less likely to own automobiles, people delaying getting a driver's license. We think this is a great trend, and it's happened concurrently with great growth in bicycling over the past few years, whether it's the Hamwey system or people owning their own bikes. And bikes are just one of the many options on this new mobility menu. Tommy just talked about one with Lyft, but we have all of these new ways to get around. There's more choices now than there's ever been, and that growth in any of these options could have implications for the T. But how? That's one of the questions we want to try to ask. Will it be less important for the T to try to serve some of these shorter 2-mile or less urban trips because of all these other options? Or, as Tommy suggested, will this variety of options actually make it easier for people to live car-free and translate into more trips for us? And then there's even bigger questions, like if these modes are only attracting our higher income customers and we're left with a population of riders that's more lower income than it is today, what happens to advocacy for T-service and support for T-service going forward? So these are all really interesting questions, I think, that we're going to be trying to engage with folks over the next few months as we try to get this process off the ground. You see our website in the bottom left corner there, that we have some business cards that you can come by and see to get that have the URL on it. That site's not quite live yet, but it will be in the next couple days. My email address is up there, and the first phase of this is really trying to ask all of you, what do you think the most important trends are for the T to plan for, and then what specific ideas do you have for how to plan for that? And then in closing, if any of you are like me, I'm sure most of you are, you probably came in this room and immediately thought of Dr. Joseph Warren, and he, and I'd like to close with just some words that he offered in this same space in 1772 at the Boston Massacre oration, where he said, "When we turn over the historic page and trace the rise and fall of states and empires, the mighty revolutions which have so often varied the face of the world strike our minds with solemn surprise, and we are naturally led to endeavor to search out the causes of such astonishing changes." Like Dr. Warren, we all sit at the edge of an era of significant change in Greater Boston. And as MassDOT and the T turns this historic page, with all the uncertainty that comes with that, hopefully we can go into that a little bit more confidently, knowing that we face that uncertainty with all of you.